Welcome to Lore of the Rings, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. There are places in Middle-earth where the living dare not tread. High in the White Mountains, beneath the shadow of Dwimorberg, the haunted mountain, lies a passage older than memory. The entrance is a yawning mouth of stone, dark and cold, exhaling a breath that smells of ancient sorrow. No birds sing near it. No flowers bloom. The very air seems to pull away, as if the world itself recoils from what dwells within. The locals call it the Paths of the Dead, and they are right to fear it. For within those twisting corridors, carved deep into the heart of the mountain, dwell the spirits of men who broke the most sacred of vows. Men who fled when courage was demanded. Men who chose shadow over light, fear over honor. Men who, in their cowardice, were bound by a curse so terrible that death itself could not release them. They are the Oathbreakers, the dead men of Dunharrow. An army trapped between life and death, condemned to wander in darkness until the end of days, or until the one they betrayed returns to claim them. For 3,000 years, they waited. Pale green mist clings to the mountainside like a shroud. Travelers who stray too close speak of whispers carried on the wind, voices that plead and threaten in equal measure. "The way is shut," they murmur. "It was made by those who are dead, and the dead keep it. The way is shut." But curses, like oaths, are not eternal. In the dying days of the Third Age, when the shadow of Mordor stretched across the land and the fires of war consumed the free peoples, a man came to the paths of the dead. Not a soldier, not a king, at least not yet. A ranger, weathered and grim, bearing a sword reforged from ancient shards. A man whose blood carried the weight of lineage and the burden of prophecy. His name was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, the rightful king of Gondor. And he alone possessed the authority to do what no mortal had dared in millennia. He came to summon the dead. The companions who rode with him, Legolas the elf, swift and keen-eyed, Gimli the dwarf, steadfast but uneasy, the Dunedain rangers, loyal unto death, stood at the threshold of the mountain and felt the chill of the abyss. Even Legolas, whose people do not fear the darkness, sensed something unnatural in that place. Gimli gripped his axe tighter, muttering prayers beneath his breath. But Aragorn did not hesitate. He stepped into the shadow, and the darkness swallowed him whole. What followed was a journey into myth itself. A descent into the underworld, where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur. Where ghostly shapes flickered in the torchlight, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted with centuries of anguish. Where whispers became screams and the very stones seemed to pulse with malice. Yet Aragorn walked on unyielding, for he carried more than a sword. He carried a lineage, a promise, a curse that only he could break. The dead recognized him. They saw in his face the ghost of Isildur, the one who had cursed them, the one whose oath they had broken. And in that recognition, something ancient stirred. Fear, hope, rage, desperation. "The way is shut," the voices cried. But Aragorn answered with words that echoed through the mountain like thunder. "I summon you to fulfill your oath." And for the first time in 3,000 years, the dead men of Dunharrow answered the call of Isildur's heir. But why? What power could compel the spirits of the damned to rise from their torment and march to war? What kind of man commands an army of ghosts, and why did they obey him? This is the story of the Ghost Army of Aragorn. A tale of betrayal and redemption, of ancient oaths and kingly authority, of a curse that shaped the fate of Middle-earth itself. It begins not with Aragorn, but with the man who cursed them. Isildur, the one who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and in doing so, sealed his own doom and the doom of countless others. Long before the Ghost Army marched, they were men, proud men. Strong men, men of the White Mountains who dwelt in the high valleys and guarded the passes between the lands of Rohan and Gondor. They built their halls in the shadow of Dwimorberg, where the stone was hard and the air cold and pure. They hunted in the forests, raised their children beneath the stars, and worshipped the old gods in ways now lost to time. But their greatest legacy was not their strength or their craft. It was their betrayal. The story begins in the closing years of the Second Age, when the Dark Lord Sauron rose to power in Mordor and the free peoples of Middle-earth united against him. Elves and men forged the last alliance, a coalition of kingdoms bound by desperation and hope. At its head stood Gil-galad, the Elven King, and Elendil, the High King of the Dunedain, father of Isildur. The armies of the Alliance marched east, crossing mountains and rivers, laying siege to Barad-dûr itself. The war was long and terrible. Thousands fell. The land was scorched, but the Alliance held. And in those dark days, Isildur, newly crowned King of Gondor, sought allies wherever he could find them. He came to the men of the White Mountains. He stood before their chieftain, a man whose name has been lost to history, erased by the weight of his failure, and asked for their aid. The terms were simple: swear allegiance to Gondor, march against the Shadow, fight for the freedom of Middle-earth. And in return, the men of the mountain would be honored as allies, their lands protected, their place in the new order secured. The chieftain agreed. He swore an oath upon the stone of Erech, a black monolith brought from Númenor, ancient and sacred. His warriors swore as well, their voices rising in unison. "We will fight," they vowed. "We will stand with you against the darkness." Isildur accepted their oath. He placed his hand upon the stone and spoke words of binding, words that echoed through the mountain passes and etched themselves into the very fabric of the world. "If you break this oath," he said, "you shall know no rest until it is fulfilled." It was not a threat, it was a prophecy. When the time came to march, the men of the mountain did not come. The armies of the Alliance mustered at the borders of Mordor. Elves sharpened their blades, men prepared for the final assault, and they waited for the warriors of the White Mountains to join them. But the mountains remained silent. The chieftain and his people had looked upon the hosts of Mordor, the orcs, the trolls, the Nazgûl circling overhead like vultures, and their courage failed. They retreated into their valleys, barred their gates, and prayed that the storm would pass them by. Isildur, standing on the plains of Dagorlad, felt the sting of betrayal. He had given them his trust. He had offered them honor, and they had chosen fear. When the war ended, when Sauron was cast down and the ring cut from his hand, Isildur did not forget. He returned to the White Mountains, not as a supplicant, but as a king wronged. He stood before the stone of Erech once more and spoke his curse. "You have broken your oath. You fled when you were needed. Therefore, you shall have no rest. You shall dwell in shadow, neither living nor dead, until the oath is fulfilled. Until the heir of Isildur calls you forth, you are bound to the darkness beneath the mountain." The curse took hold immediately. The chieftain and his warriors tried to flee, but they could not. Their bodies withered and faded, but their spirits remained, tethered to the mountain, unable to pass beyond the circles of the world. They became wraiths, hollow and tormented, haunting the paths of the dead for centuries uncounted. Their halls fell silent. Their names were forgotten. Even their crimes became legend, half-remembered whispers told by firelight, but the curse endured. For 3,000 years, they waited in the darkness. No king of Gondor dared summon them. No heir of Isildur descended into the paths. The line of kings faded, broken by war and time, until only the rangers remained, wanderers in the wild, guardians of a kingdom that no longer existed. And still the dead waited, until the day Aragorn stood at the threshold of the mountain and spoke the words they had longed to hear. "I am Isildur's heir. I summon you to fulfill your oath." The shadows stirred, and the army of the dead began to rise. The paths of the dead are not a place for the faint of heart. Even Gimli, who had walked through the mines of Moria and faced the Balrog's flame, felt the oppressive weight of the mountain pressing down upon him. The air was stale and cold, thick with the scent of stone and decay. The torches flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "I do not fear the dead," Gimli muttered, though his voice betrayed him. Legolas, walking beside him, said nothing. His keen eyes scanned the darkness ahead, and his hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife. Even for an elf who could see in the dimmest light, the paths were unsettling. There was a wrongness here, a corruption of the natural order. Aragorn walked at the front, his torch held high, his expression grim but resolute. He did not look back. He could not afford to. Behind them, the Grey Company, 30 rangers of the north, men who had ridden with Aragorn through countless battles, followed in silence. They were hard men, accustomed to danger, but even they felt the creeping dread of the mountain. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth. The walls were carved with ancient symbols, worn smooth by time. Some were recognizable runes of Númenor, marks of kingship, but others were older, stranger, remnants of a culture long forgotten. And then the whispers began. At first, they were almost imperceptible, a rustling like wind through dry leaves. But as the company pressed on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Turn back. The way is shut. You do not belong here." Gimli gripped his axe tighter. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," Aragorn replied, his voice steady. "They know we are here." "And what will they do?" Gimli asked. Aragorn did not answer. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, so large that the torchlight could not reach the ceiling. The floor was littered with bones, ancient, yellowed, crumbling to dust. And in the center of the chamber stood the stone of Erech. It was a monolith of black rock, smooth and unmarked, taller than a man. It radiated cold, and the air around it shimmered faintly, as if the stone itself warped the fabric of reality. Aragorn approached it slowly. As he drew near, the whispers stopped. The silence was worse. And then from the darkness beyond the torchlight, shapes began to emerge. They were not solid. They flickered and wavered like reflections on water. Pale green light clung to them, illuminating faces twisted with anguish and rage. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. The dead men of Dunharrow had come. Gimli raised his axe, but Legolas placed a hand on his arm. "There is no weapon that can harm them," the elf said quietly. "Then what do we do?" Gimli hissed. "We trust Aragorn." The spirits surrounded them, closing in from all sides. The Grey Company drew together, hands on their swords, though they knew their blades would be useless. But Aragorn stood firm. He raised his hand, and in it he held Anduril, the Flame of the West, the sword reforged from Narsil, the blade that had cut the ring from Sauron's hand. The sword gleamed in the torchlight, and the dead recoiled. Aragorn's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur. I have come to claim what is mine." The spirits writhed and hissed, but they did not retreat. "You swore an oath," Aragorn continued. "An oath to the king of Gondor, an oath you broke. For 3,000 years you have dwelt in darkness, tormented by your failure. But I offer you redemption." The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, desperate. "We cannot fight. We are cursed. We are nothing." "You are bound," Aragorn said, "but you are not powerless." The shadow rises once more. Sauron's armies march upon Gondor. Minas Tirith stands on the brink of destruction. The free peoples of Middle-earth need you. He stepped closer to the stone, his gaze sweeping over the ghostly host. "I summon you to fulfill your oath. Fight for Gondor. Stand against the darkness as you should have done long ago. And when the battle is won, I will release you. You will have your rest." The silence that followed was absolute. And then, from the mass of spirits, a single figure stepped forward. It was the chieftain, the one who had led his people to betrayal. His form was more solid than the others, his face more distinct. He looked at Aragorn with eyes that burned with centuries of regret and rage. "And if we refuse?" The chieftain asked, his voice like wind through broken reeds. Aragorn did not flinch. "Then you will remain here, bound to this darkness until the world ends. The choice is yours." The chieftain stared at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, he knelt. One by one, the other spirits followed, sinking to the ground in a wave of submission. Aragorn raised Anduril high, and his voice echoed through the chamber. "Then rise, dead men of Dunharrow. Rise and follow the heir of Isildur. Your time has come." The spirits rose, and the mountain trembled. They came forth like a tide of mist and shadow. From the paths of the dead, the ghostly host poured into the light of day, spilling down the mountainside in a river of pale green flame. The air grew cold in their wake. The trees bent away from them. Even the stones seemed to shudder as they passed. Aragorn rode at their head, mounted on a gray horse, Anduril gleaming at his side. Behind him came Legolas and Gimli, the Grey Company, and the countless dead, an army that no mortal force could withstand. Word of their coming spread like wildfire. In the villages along the mountain's edge, people shuttered their windows and barred their doors. Mothers clutched their children. Men whispered prayers to gods they no longer believed in. "The king of the dead rides," they said. "The cursed have awakened." But Aragorn did not stop. He rode south, toward the great river Anduin, toward the port city of Pelargir, where the corsairs of Umbar had gathered their fleet. The corsairs were allies of Sauron, pirates, and raiders who had sailed north to join the assault on Gondor. Their black ships filled the harbor, their sails bearing the red serpent of Umbar. They were many. They were armed. They were ready for war. But they were not ready for what came next. The people of Pelargir saw the mist first. It rolled down from the hills like a living thing, green and cold and unnatural. The air grew thick with the scent of death. The corsairs, confident in their strength, jeered and raised their weapons. "Come then," they shouted. "We are not afraid of shadows." But when the dead emerged from the mist, their laughter died. The ghostly host swept into the city like a wave crashing upon the shore. The corsairs tried to fight, but their swords passed through the spirits without resistance. The dead, however, could touch the living. They reached out with hands like ice, and men fell, their faces frozen in terror. Others fled, leaping from the docks into the river, only to be dragged beneath the water by spectral hands. The black ships burned, set aflame by torches that the dead wielded without heat or substance. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. Within hours, Pelargir was taken. The corsairs were scattered, their fleet in ruins. And Aragorn stood upon the docks, looking out at the ships that remained, dozens of vessels enough to carry an army. He turned to the dead, and his voice was solemn. "You have done well. The oath is not yet complete, but you have proven yourselves. Come with me to Minas Tirith. Stand with Gondor in its darkest hour. And when the battle is won, you will have your freedom." The chieftain stepped forward, his hollow eyes fixed on Aragorn. "We will come," he said. "But remember your promise, King. We have waited long enough." Aragorn nodded. "I will not forget." The Grey Company boarded the ships, along with men from the southern fiefs who had rallied to Aragorn's call. And behind them, unseen but ever present, the dead followed. The fleet sailed north, up the Anduin, toward the besieged city. Meanwhile, on the Pelennor fields, the fate of Gondor hung in the balance. The armies of Mordor had encircled Minas Tirith, a vast host of orcs, trolls, and Easterlings. The Witch King of Angmar, Lord of the Nazgul, had broken the gates of the city with sorcery and fire. The defenders fought valiantly, but they were vastly outnumbered. Theoden, King of Rohan, had come to their aid with 6,000 riders, but even their charge had been blunted by the sheer mass of the enemy. The king himself had fallen, slain by the Witch King. All seemed lost. And then, from the south, the ships appeared. At first, the defenders despaired. The black sails bore the Serpent of Umbar, Sauron's allies. It seemed that even the sea had turned against them. But Aragorn stood at the prow of the lead ship, and he unfurled a banner, the white tree of Gondor, the stars of Elendil shining above it. The trumpet call rang out, clear and bright, and from the ships the army of the dead surged forth. They moved like wind across the battlefield, unstoppable and terrifying. The orcs scattered before them, their courage broken. The trolls roared and swung their clubs, but the dead could not be harmed. They passed through the enemy ranks like smoke, leaving only death in their wake. The defenders of Minas Tirith watched in awe. "Who are they?" A soldier whispered. "The dead," another replied. "The king has brought the dead to fight for us." Aragorn led the charge, Anduril blazing in the sunlight. The Grey Company fought beside him, and the men of the southern fiefs joined the fray. But it was the ghostly host that turned the tide. The orcs broke and fled. The Easterlings retreated. The siege was lifted. And as the sun set over the Pelennor fields, Aragorn stood amidst the carnage, his sword bloodied, his armor dented, but his resolve unshaken. The dead gathered around him, silent and expectant. He raised his hand, and his voice carried across the battlefield. "You have fulfilled your oath. You fought when it mattered most. The curse is lifted. You are free." The chieftain knelt before him one last time. "Thank you, King," he whispered. And then, like mist beneath the morning sun, the dead began to fade. Their forms grew translucent, their light dimming. One by one, they vanished, released at last from the bonds of their curse. The battlefield grew quiet, and Aragorn stood alone, the weight of kingship heavy upon his shoulders. Where do the dead go when their chains are broken? It is a question that haunts the living, a mystery that no mortal can answer with certainty. For the men of the mountain, who had dwelt in shadow for 3,000 years, the release was both a gift and an enigma. When Aragorn spoke the words, "You are free," the curse that bound them shattered like glass. The spectral chains that tethered them to the world dissolved. The cold, hollow ache that had filled them for millennia lifted. But freedom, for the dead, is not the same as it is for the living. They did not wake to a new life. They did not return to their bodies, long since turned to dust. They simply faded. Some say they passed beyond the circles of the world into the halls of Mandos. where the spirits of men await the final judgment. Others believe they were granted the gift of men, true death, the release from existence that Iluvatar bestowed upon his mortal children. But there are darker whispers as well. Some claim that the dead were not truly freed, but merely transferred, that the curse was not broken, but passed on. That Aragorn, in claiming the allegiance of the dead, took their burden upon himself. That the shadow of their oath now clings to him, a stain upon his soul that will follow him into the halls of his fathers. Tolkien himself left this question unanswered. In his writings, he described the Oathbreakers as men who could find no rest until their oath was fulfilled. But he did not say what happened after. Did they find peace? Did they dissolve into nothingness? Or did they linger, bound to Aragorn in ways unseen? The ambiguity is deliberate. For Tolkien, the fate of the soul was a sacred mystery, not to be dissected or explained. He drew upon his Catholic faith, his belief in divine justice and mercy, but he also understood that not all questions have answers, at least not in this life. The dead were cursed because they broke an oath. In Tolkien's mythology, oaths are not mere words. They are binding forces woven into the fabric of creation. When Fëanor and his sons swore their terrible oath in the First Age, it brought ruin upon the elves for centuries. When Turin swore vengeance, it sealed his doom. And when the men of the mountain swore allegiance to Isildur, they bound themselves to a fate they could not escape. Oaths in Middle-earth are powerful and dangerous, but they are also redemptive. The curse of the Oathbreakers was not eternal because Tolkien believed in mercy. He believed that even the gravest sins could be atoned for, that even the most broken souls could find redemption if they were willing to pay the price. And the men of the mountain paid. They fought when it mattered most. They stood against the darkness they had once fled. They fulfilled the oath they had broken, and in doing so, they reclaimed their honor. Aragorn's command was not just an act of kingly authority. It was an act of grace. He could have left them to their torment. He could have used them and then discarded them, as Sauron used his servants. But he did not. He offered them a chance to be more than the worst thing they had ever done. And when the battle was over, he let them go. There is a moment just after the Pelennor fields when Aragorn stands alone amidst the fading spirits. The battlefield is quiet. The dead are vanishing, one by one, dissolving into the twilight. And Aragorn bows his head. It is a gesture of respect, of mourning, of acknowledgement. He knows what it costs them to return. He knows the weight of their suffering, the depth of their regret, and he honors it. This is what separates Aragorn from the tyrants of Middle-earth. This is what makes him a king. He does not seek to dominate. He does not demand submission. He offers redemption and then he lets go. But the question remains, did the dead truly find peace? Or are they still out there, somewhere beyond the veil, wandering in a realm we cannot see? Some say the paths of the dead are silent now. That the mountain no longer whispers. That the curse has been lifted for good. But others claim that on still nights, when the wind blows cold from the White Mountains, you can still hear them. Voices in the dark. Whispers carried on the breeze. The way is shut. It's not a warning, a lament. A memory of what was, and what might have been. The tale of the Ghost Army did not end when the spirits faded. Their legacy endured, woven into the fabric of Middle-earth's history, shaping the fate of kingdoms and the rise of kings. The ghostly host that swept across the Pelennor fields became legend, a story told in taverns and halls, passed down from generation to generation. But the true legacy of the dead is not found in songs or stories. It is found in the man who commanded them. Aragorn's summoning of the Oathbreakers was a turning point, not just in the War of the Ring, but in his own journey from ranger to king. It was the moment he fully embraced his heritage, his authority, his destiny. For decades, Aragorn had walked in the shadows, using the name Strider, hiding his lineage. He had been reluctant to claim the throne, haunted by the failures of Isildur, burdened by the weight of his bloodline. But the paths of the dead changed him. When he stood before the stone of Erech and summoned the dead, he was no longer a ranger. He was Isildur's heir, speaking with the voice of kings, and the dead recognized it. They saw in him the authority of Númenor, the strength of Elendil, the righteousness that Isildur himself had lacked. They saw a man who could command the loyalty of the dead and earn it. This was not power born of fear or sorcery. It was power born of legitimacy. Aragorn did not force the dead to obey. He offered them a choice: fulfill the oath and be free, or remain in torment. And they chose to follow him, not because they had to, but because they believed in him. This is the essence of true kingship. A king does not rule by force alone. He rules by consent, by trust, by the willing submission of his people. And Aragorn earned that trust from the living and the dead alike. The victory at Pelargir and the triumph on the Pelennor fields cemented his claim to the throne. The southern fiefs rallied to him. The men of Gondor saw in him the return of the line of kings. Even the steward, Denethor, though consumed by madness, could not deny the signs. Aragorn had fulfilled the prophecies. He had walked the paths of the dead and emerged victorious. He had commanded an army of ghosts. He had wielded Anduril, the sword of Elendil, and led the free peoples to victory. He was no longer Strider. He was Elessar, the Elfstone, king of Gondor and Arnor. But the legacy of the dead extends beyond Aragorn himself. The Oathbreakers represent a deeper theme in Tolkien's work, the idea that redemption is always possible, no matter how far one has fallen. The men of the mountain were cowards. They betrayed their oath at the moment it mattered most. They fled from the darkness instead of standing against it. And yet, they were not condemned forever. They were given a second chance. This reflects Tolkien's Catholic worldview, his belief in grace and forgiveness. He understood that people make mistakes, that they fail, that they fall short of their ideals. But he also believed that failure is not the end of the story. The dead could have remained in torment, trapped by their sin, consumed by despair. But Aragorn offered them a way out, not through mercy alone, but through action. They had to fight. They had to stand. They had to do what they should have done 3,000 years earlier. And when they did, they were freed. This is a powerful message. It speaks to anyone who has ever failed, who has ever broken a promise, who has ever looked back on their life with regret. It says that redemption is possible, not through wishful thinking or empty apologies, but through courageous action. The Oathbreakers could not undo the past, but they could shape the future. And in doing so, they reclaimed their honor. The story also raises a haunting question. What happens when redemption is delayed? The men of the mountain waited 3,000 years for their chance to atone. Generations of spirits lingered in darkness, tormented by what they had done, unable to escape. Would it have been better if Isildur had not cursed them, if they had simply died and passed beyond the world? Or was the curse, terrible as it was, a kind of mercy, a chance to make things right, no matter how long it took? Tolkien does not give us an easy answer, but he suggests that oaths, once made, cannot simply be forgotten. They bind us, shape us, define us, and when we break them, we carry the weight of that failure, sometimes for the rest of our lives, sometimes beyond. The curse of the Oathbreakers was a consequence of their actions, but it was also an opportunity, and in the end, they seized it. The legacy of the dead is a reminder that it is never too late to do the right thing, even after 3,000 years, even after death itself. In the final accounting, the story of the Ghost Army is not about ghosts at all. It is about a king, a man who walked into the darkness and emerged with an army at his back, a man who commanded the dead with the authority of his bloodline and the strength of his will, a man who understood that true power lies not in domination, but in mercy. Aragorn's journey through the paths of the dead is one of the most mythic moments in The Lord of the Rings. It is a descent into the underworld, a confrontation with the sins of the past, a test of courage and legitimacy. And it is a mirror. For in summoning the dead, Aragorn confronted not just their failure, but his own doubts. He faced the legacy of Isildur, the ancestor who had defeated Sauron but could not destroy the ring, the king who had cursed the men of the mountain but could not redeem them. Aragorn succeeded where Isildur had failed. He wielded Anduril, the sword reforged, a symbol of renewal and restoration. He commanded the dead, but he did not enslave them. He led them to war, but he gave them their freedom. This is the kingship Tolkien envisioned, a kingship rooted in humility, justice, and compassion. Aragorn did not seek the throne for power or glory. He took it because it was his duty, his burden, his destiny. And when he commanded the dead, he did so not for his own gain, but for the salvation of Middle-earth. The ghosts followed him because they saw in him a king worthy of their allegiance. And when the battle was over, when the oath was fulfilled, Aragorn did something no other ruler would have done. He let them go. He could have kept them. He could have bound them to his service, using them as an eternal weapon, an invincible army to secure his reign. But he did not. He spoke the words, "Be at peace," and he released them. This is the essence of his kingship. He understood that true authority is not about control, but about service. That a king's duty is not to dominate his people, but to protect them, guide them, and when the time comes, let them go. The dead had served their purpose. Their oath was fulfilled, and Aragorn honored that. In doing so, he became more than a king. He became a redeemer. The final image of the Ghost Army is one of dissolution, a fading into light, a release from torment, a return to the natural order. The spirits vanish, one by one, until only silence remains. And Aragorn stands alone on the battlefield, the weight of his crown already settling upon his shoulders. He has claimed his throne. He has proven his worth. He has walked the paths of the dead and returned victorious. But the victory is bittersweet. For he knows that the dead are not the only ones who carry the burden of the past. He knows that the sins of his ancestors, Isildur's failure, the long decline of Gondor, the broken oaths and forgotten promises, are now his to bear. And he knows that the war is not over. Sauron still lives. The ring has not yet been destroyed. The fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance. But for one brief moment, standing amidst the fading ghosts, Aragorn allows himself to rest. He has done what no one else could do. He has redeemed the dead. And in doing so, he has redeemed himself. The curse of the dead ended not in vengeance, but in grace. For 3,000 years, the men of the mountain wandered in darkness, tormented by their failure, bound by their broken oath. They were neither living nor dead, trapped in a liminal space, unable to move forward, unable to let go. And then, in the dying days of the Third Age, a king came. Not the king who cursed them, but his heir. Not a man seeking revenge, but a man offering redemption. Aragorn walked the paths of the dead, confronted the ghosts of the past, and gave them what they had longed for, a chance to make things right. And when the battle was won, when the oath was fulfilled, he gave them something even greater: freedom. The story of the Ghost Army is, at its heart, a story about grace. It is about the possibility of redemption, no matter how far one has fallen. It is about the power of oaths, the weight of failure, and the hope of second chances. It is about a king who understood that true authority is not about domination, but about mercy. And it is about the dead who waited for 3,000 years and finally found peace. Tolkien's mythology is filled with tragic figures: Fëanor, bound by his oath; Turin, doomed by his pride; Isildur, unable to destroy the ring. But amidst the tragedy, there is always a thread of hope. The Oathbreakers were cowards. They failed when they were needed most, but they were not condemned forever. They were given a chance to atone, and they took it. This is the power of Tolkien's vision, the belief that even in the darkest moments, redemption is possible, that even the most broken oaths can be fulfilled, that even the dead can find peace. The paths of the dead are silent now. The mountain no longer whispers. The green mist has faded. The curse has been lifted, but the memory remains. In the halls of Minas Tirith, when the bards sing of the War of the Ring, they speak of the Ghost Army that turned the tide. They tell of Aragorn, the king who walked into the darkness and emerged with an army at his back. They remember the dead who fought for redemption and found it. And in the quiet moments when the wind blows cold from the White Mountains, some still claim they can hear it. Not a warning, not a threat, but a whisper: "Be at peace." It is the voice of a king echoing through the ages. A command, a blessing, a promise kept. For the dead are gone, but their legacy endures. They remind us that it is never too late to do the right thing. That failure is not the end of the story. That oaths once broken can still be fulfilled. And that true kingship is not about power, but about grace. Aragorn understood this. When he stood before the stone of Erech, he did not demand obedience. He offered a choice. When he led the dead into battle, he did not treat them as slaves. He honored them as warriors. And when the war was over, he did not bind them to his service. He released them. This is the mark of a true king. Not the crown he wears, but the burdens he carries. Not the power he wields, but the mercy he shows. Aragorn was Isildur's heir, but he was not Isildur. He carried the same bloodline, the same legacy, the same burden, but he chose a different path. He chose redemption over vengeance, freedom over control, grace over power. And in doing so, he became the greatest King Gondor had ever known. The Ghost Army is gone, but the story endures. And in the silence of the mountain beneath the stars, a king's voice still echoes: "Be at peace." Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.